Hello, Bay community. Welcome to another parenting and mental health series. Today, we're going to talk about mental health and screen time. Specifically, we're getting back into the world of, the school year and trying to figure out how to balance it all. And I wanted to talk a little maybe what we would call psychoeducation around screens. Um, the reason I want to spend some time talking about that today is because I've been there. I know so many parents that have been there, and it's just hard to navigate it all. It's hard to navigate understanding when what to do with our kids. Everyone I talk to, I feel like we've all made mistakes related to screen time and what we do with our kids. I know for me personally, when my son was in elementary school, I thought, oh, there were kindergartners, first graders with cell phones. And I just looked at my son and said, don't even talk to me until middle school. You're not getting one until middle school. I thought that was a great solution. Now that my son's in middle school, I'm rethinking what I said, right? And now I'm wondering, wow, is this too early? How do I deal with this? And I've gotten some great advice from other parents, pediatricians, experts in the field, all around this. So I wanted to spend some time with you today talking through this, and I hope that I can share some helpful advice related to this. So we're going to go ahead and get started sharing. And I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll get going. Okay, so related to this, and I'm not sure that I want to keep this up. Sorry about that. I don't love that particular sharing screen. Try that again. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is much better. You don't need to see my face while we're talking. So today we're going to talk about smartphones and mental health. Really, we're talking about screens in general, but smartphones are kind of the main culprit these days because they do everything for us. I thought this particular quote was a good one today, that technology should empower us, not overwhelm us. And I think sometimes we do feel a little bit like a slave to our technology. We use it for everything. And especially for our generation of kids, they've grown up with screens. I didn't. Yes, we had a computer in our house when I was pretty young, and that felt really important. But as a computer that was plugged into the wall, it was heavy. It didn't go with me everywhere. Now kids have something that go with them everywhere, and they're expected to have it. What I hear from a lot of parents is, I don't want them to have a smartphone yet, or I don't want a cell phone, because of all the things that come along with it. However, they're telling me that they're feeling left out of friend conversations, that they're being ostracized because they're the one kid that doesn't have a screen. And that can be really hard on parents, right? We want our kids to fit in, but we also want our kids to be successful, and we're trying to find that balance. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. So why are we concerned about screens and smartphones to begin with? Well, the biggest reason that we are concerned is mostly because of our, in our kids' generation, or, with our adolescents and teens, the Pew Research Organization in 2022 said that 95% of teens report having access to a smartphone. Not surprising there. 45% of them say that they're almost constantly on their phone, which, for those of you that have teenagers, or for those of you that have kids that do have a phone, that's also not surprising because we see it in them, right? And honestly, we see it in our adult population too. I see lots of adults that have this phone, and they're just sitting there and they're like this all the time, right? We don't need to be there, and it's really not good for us. The average daily screen time for students, not including schoolwork screen time. So this is not including being on a computer for schoolwork or the time that they're on a screen in school is around 7 hours. So do the math. They're in school from somewhere between 6 to 8 hours a day. Then you add another 7 hours of screen time. That means they're on it constantly when they get out of school. And that can be really, really scary for parents. So 7+ hours they're on a screen. Of those that report that smartphone use, and this is where it really becomes scary, 49.5% of these kids reporting that constant smartphone use are reporting mental health issues throughout the rest of their life. So for those of obviously this generation, isn't well into their 50s and 60s. So we don't have really long-term data on it yet, but we do have the millennial generation that started on computers and smartphones were really a part of our phones, at least were part of their lives. And we're starting to get to this new generation that is entering the workforce, that Generation Z that has had a smartphone since they were very young. So we're starting to see it. So one in two kids are reporting mental health challenges that are in that constant use. And this includes things like anxiety, depression, and things like suicidal ideations, and it's being correlated to smartphone use. So I want to explain some things around smartphones, and we know it's part of our daily lives. Well, what are we going to do about it? I can tell you these statistics, and you're probably sitting there going, yeah, I know, like I didn't know the exact statistics, I didn't know the exact numbers, but I knew that this wasn't the best thing for my kids. So what do we do about it? We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about how these screens impact our kids from a neurobiological standpoint, because I think it's important that we're empowered in that way. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. Because my screen sharing is paused. I'm not really sure why. There we go. Okay. So as far as this goes, I want to bring this screen up to show just some of the ways that screens and smartphones in particular impact us, right? So when we think of screen time, we usually think of the times when we've been watched shows on Netflix or Apple TV, and where we attended, especially during the pandemic, when we attended that 3-hour-long Zoom call, or for kids that are now out of high school and are into college, they often joke with me and say they have post-traumatic stress from Zoom time school calls where they spent hours and hours on Zoom or Google Meet with their teachers, because that was how they learned, because they were stuck at home. What we don't think about when we're thinking about screen time is the chemicals in our brain and how that screen time is slowly impacting and influencing our mood and actually our neurobiology. So when we were quarantined, we would spend hours and hours on social media, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to connect with people in other ways. I certainly saw this in the adolescent population, where they're trying to find different ways to connect with one another. A lot of FaceTiming, a lot of Zoom, a lot of Google Meet, all trying to find ways to connect when we weren't allowed to be in physical contact with one another. And what happened is we saw a huge rise in mental health issues among that population. So we know how important it is to make real physical contact with other people. We also saw a rise in cyberbullying, among other things. So we want to really look at those things. And now we've had a little bit of time to study it since the pandemic, and we're seeing what's going on. So during that time, we noticed some things that were going on. While we're looking at a screen, our eyes slowly start to droop, and we noticed that a lot of teens that were on screen for 7+ hours, not including their school time, were reporting a lot of sleep issues. In fact, 68% of students that reported that high level of screen time are reporting sleep issues. So there's no doubt that these devices can have a pretty big impact. So what does that mean? What does that mean for a developing brain? For kids as young as 5, actually younger. In fact, the American Association for Pediatrics basically says any child under 18 months, don't let them have screen time at all. I know it's hard. There are all sorts of apps out there, Sesame Street included, that kind of tailor towards that age group. And I have to tell you, having been there with small toddlers, you get to that moment where you just need a break. And so it used to be turning on the TV and trying to find a cartoon they would watch. That is actually a little bit better than giving them a smartphone with an app on it, and I'll explain why. First, I want to say I'm not completely anti-screen. There are a lot of benefits. I will talk about that later. However, and there's a lot of things, like I said, smartphones, technology should empower us, not exhaust us. We're not overwhelm us. And unfortunately, we sometimes we don't get that balance. So let's talk a little bit about our brain involving screen time. First of all, our brain, we have something called our prefrontal cortex, which is right up here, right behind our forehead. And that area is involved with what we call executive function, or an executive function means decision-making, organization, impulse control, emotional regulation, and that continues to grow and develop into our mid-20s. That is why oftentimes we feel like teens can be a little bit more impulsive, a little less regulated emotionally. There's a reason behind that, and there's actually a biological reason behind that. And for kids that struggle with executive function, there's often that part of the brain is not as active as it would be in a child that does not have executive function issues. And if you had your child get an MRI that has executive function issues, you would see that firsthand in comparison to what we would consider, you know, a normal brain or someone that does not have executive function issues. So what's the research say about executive function and screen time? Well, what we're realizing is that the research suggests that excessive screen time can alter brain structures like the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, which is inside, like it's in the middle of kind of our brain structure. And our hippocampus has a lot of roles around memory and emotional control also. And the hippocampus is part and closely attached to what we call the limbic system, which controls our emotions. The hippocampus, the limbic system, and our prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is also something we would consider to be kind of our working memory. For those computer geeks out there, it'd be kind of like our RAM. It's the memory that we're consciously using. It's not all those, it's not like heart rate and breathing and things like that. It's stuff that we're consciously thinking about. And that's really what's happening right here. That's all of our conscious, it's the way we focus, right? So a lot of folks that struggle with executive function issues, they do struggle with focus. For folks with ADHD, they often have a lack of activity, or you know, the activity in their prefrontal cortex is lower than those that don't have ADHD. So, and that and our working memory is really closely connected to how we get that from working memory, our conscious, to something that we can store for later, right? The memory that we keep and that we can retrieve, that actually is tied more to our limbic system, our emotions. You can imagine the memories that are strongest for you are probably the ones that had the biggest impact emotionally. You hear the quote, you know, people will never really remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. There's a reason behind that from a neurobiological standpoint, and it's called the limbic system and the hippocampus. Okay, so I'm babbling a lot about that. Sorry. You know me, I love my neuroscience. It's where I came from, and so I geek out on that all the time. So, okay, so all that's connected, right? So when we look at MRIs, those colorful pictures of the brain and what's functioning, what's activated in the brain, they show that heavy tech use is associated with less gray matter in the brain's frontal cortex. And that then leads to less impulse control, right? The other thing we're noticing is that chemicals like dopamine and serotonin play a really important role and are altered by excessive screen use. So we pay attention that the screen time impacts and disrupts certain brain chemicals. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. In particular, we have these two neurotransmitters, or these brain chemicals, called serotonin and dopamine. And with excessive screen use, and specifically when we're talking about smartphones and the apps that are designed on smartphones today, they are designed to make us keep going back to that app. Okay, nothing against people that develop these apps. They're really smart people, and they want you to buy their app. They want you to use their app because that might mean some more advertising dollars or what have you, right? They're there to make money. Their app is trying to make money. So they want you to use it. How do you get someone to use an app again? Same way you get someone to eat a food for a second time. It has to taste good. Something tastes really good, our brain releases dopamine. The reason our brain releases dopamine is our brain's way of communicating with the rest of our body's way of communicating with us to say, hey, this really feels good. We want to do this again. We like this. Dopamine is also the main neurochemical in our brain that's associated with addiction. Okay, this is why it can feel, our phones and screens can feel really addictive. It's one of the main reasons why our kids struggle to put down those screens. What we've also found, so dopamine gets overproduced with excessive screen time on smartphones, especially, and we see it in video games, right? These video games are designed to get increased dopamine production, right? It's that hit of something that feels really good, whether it's, you're on a first shooter game and you kill the enemy coming at you, or you're on a social media and you get likes for the picture you took, or you hear from people you haven't heard from them in a while. All dopamine hits. It's also the same response that you get from using really addictive drugs like cocaine, right? You get a dopamine hit from cocaine use. Why am I telling you this? Because it has similar addictive properties. So we would think, wow, we don't want our 12-year-old doing cocaine. Well, you can get similar dopamine hits from using a screen. And while all the other physiological issues might not quite be the same, there's that addictive quality there. So we have to pay attention to it like something that's addictive. And sorry if you hear Bentley snoring in the background, but yes, she's clearly not getting a dopamine hit right now. She's using something called serotonin more because that regulates mood and allows us to relax, feel content, peaceful. Excessive screen use actually inhibits or decreases serotonin. So if you have felt a lot less joy, a lot less happiness in things, or less enjoyment out of things, it probably means that you're not getting enough serotonin. So serotonin can say this feels good. It can also tell us like, yeah, this felt good, but I've had enough, right? It can help control impulses. It can help us feel like we're in more control, can kind of feel peaceful and contentment. You notice people that are really in that content state, they don't feel that anxiety around needing to do something more, right? It also decreases aggression, decreases suicidal ideations, and increase in excessive screen use reduces serotonin, increases dopamine. So that's what we're kind of getting out of that. So a little bit more about that dopamine reward loop that I mentioned earlier. Smartphones trigger dopamine release. Like I said a second ago, overstimulation it makes excessive dopamine, and it creates this feedback loop, right? You pick up your phone, maybe your phone buzzes, or now we have smartwatches. Oh gosh. Okay. So now our smartwatch buzzes. We're like, oh, sometimes you just look at your smartwatch, but a lot of times you'll then pick up the phone. Oh, someone's calling me. Someone just notified me. You pick up your phone, it buzzed. Okay. You get that immediate, you feel the vibration, or maybe you hear the notification. You get that anxiety. You feel the urge to grab the phone immediately. It's, if any of you have parents, remember your intro to psych class and you remember Pavlov's dogs, this is the bell, people, this is the bell. Instead of salivating, we are now getting a dopamine hit of like, ooh, my phone vibrates, usually something good's happening. So we get a little dopamine hit. We feel good. And that's probably because when we have looked at our phone, something good happened, right? There are tons of different things with social media, and we get the likes, we get the loves, we get the hugs. We get to hear from people we haven't heard from for a while. Or, now with algorithms around, other things like the way we get ads fed to us, or the type of things we're reading, it feeds what we believe in. And so then that feels good too. Like, oh yeah, okay, this is happening. Or in Snapchat, we get to see how we're somebody's best friend because they talk to us more than anybody else. And that feels really good until it doesn't, right? Until you find out on Snap that your best friend's talking to someone else more. Snap is the bane of my existence in the therapeutic setting because it keeps stats on your friends. Think about that for a second. Do we really want to keep stats on our friends? Like, when did it become like that? When was it about who who has more likes or who has more time with another, right? It should just be about enjoying the time with the other person. So as dopamine increases, we need more dopamine. So as we get more dopamine, we have to maintain that level. So therefore, we keep going up and up and up, and it keeps going until our teens, our kids start to feel a lot of anxiety around needing that feeling. So definitely finding time in the summer if you can, going out, getting in the woods, putting the phones down. We'll talk about that later. You gotta get that threshold level, that baseline level back down so you don't feel it. Okay, so what are the consequences here? So there are a lot of studies that show that teens that spend more than 3 hours per day on screens, which we're finding out is, actually that's below average, right? They're experiencing higher rates of depression and anxiety. Beyond this, screens been linked to cognitive impairment. Okay, that's not something we hear often, but that means kids aren't learning as quickly or as well as they used to. In 2018, this was pre-pandemic, people, and this got a lot worse after the pandemic. Say that children spent over 2 hours of time on screens a day had lower scores in language and thinking tests, logic, and communication. If you have a teenager, you know how important that is, and you know how much you're already struggling with those two things, logic and communication. More screen time means those two things go down. So additionally, those that spent more than 7 hours on a screen had thinning gray matter, which is what I just talked about. That frontal cortex that's involved with the executive function gets smaller. When it gets smaller, there are less neurons to help with the executive function and focus. So what does that mean? Higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, feeling overwhelmed more quickly because you can't organize your thoughts the way you would like to. This can become a real issue, and this screen time is really starting to show up in ways that we didn't want it to. Furthermore, we want to go into it deeper. We want to talk about the social media effect, okay? We've all been there. If I know even my generation kind of started to grow up around the social media world, and it was used to help find people, to help connect people. Unfortunately, now it's used to and it's just does this too, to compare people, right? So teens, adolescents, even kids are constantly comparing themselves to others on social media. It just used to be magazine covers, right? We were yelling at magazine covers for showing these unrealistic views of women, men, everybody, right? Everyone looks thin and healthy. And that wasn't what real people looked like. Well, now imagine on social media, that's constantly happening. People constantly post their happy photos and then they had a filter. So it's not even what they really look like, right? And then what happens is we see how everyone else is so happy and everything's going so well, and we feel bad about ourselves. Get a lot of people in here that talk about how they see their significant other, because a lot of kids these days are meeting their boyfriends and girlfriends on social media. And they meet first and they talk on social media and they get to know each other on social media long before they're ever in physical contact, which in some ways seems good, right? You get to know someone first. However, then that social media becomes part of how they know each other. And when they start to see their significant others or their friends posting things where they weren't included, makes them feel bad. And then they feel like they're excluded and they aren't feeling good. Or they use social media to kind of jab at each other. I have people in this office, they'll talk about how when they get to hang out with a particular person and another person doesn't, they'll purposely take a selfie of the two of them and post just so that other person feels bad because maybe they're in a fight with them, right? They use it to make other people jealous. So we see that in a way of cyberbullying on the rise. We'll find ways that people will find people that they don't even know each other just to pick on them because it gives them a sense of control. And that, of course, impacts mental health. So we're seeing that social media increases this maturation rate in ways that's actually really immature, right? They're not having to navigate social interactions the way they used to, where they had to really understand what a facial expression meant or what intonation in a voice or tone of a voice meant. So now when they're getting in real physical contact and real contact with one another, they don't understand how to navigate that. And it's really impacting our young adults who went through this already, their relationship abilities. So this maturation is both mature and immature, and it's really causing a big issue socially. Okay, so what else? Can smartphones be addictive? I've already told you the answer to this. Yes. Luckily, right now, research is only showing maybe up to about 20%, I'm rounding up here, of young people showing signs of addiction. However, this was from a few years ago. I would put money on the fact that that's higher now. Signs of addiction are things like you would see in someone that's going into rehab. So they show signs of restlessness, nausea. They start to do things to get on their phones that are unhealthy. So things that used to not be a problem, right? Like putting their phone away. When you're setting clear boundaries, now our schools are saying like, hey, you can't use your phone during the day. And they have pretty severe consequences, but yet kids are trying to sneak time on their phone. Why? They're in school with all their friends. Why do they need to get on their phone? So we're starting to see things like that. We're starting to see things like addiction where kids are already watching TV or they're already in a conversation and they're on their phone while they're doing it because they feel the need to get that hit. So again, addiction is hard to break. There are neurochemicals connected to that, like dopamine. And so we have to treat it as such. Okay, here we are. So what can we do, right? As parents, you do have the power to set healthy screen time habits for your children. The good news is a lot of apps have parental controls baked in. If you use Google, when you set up your kid's first email address, you can set limits around it and you make them part of the family unit. Apple has this too, where you make your kids part of the family group, and then you have control over screen time. I know telecommunication companies like Verizon, you can control different devices and you can set time limits on devices. That means different plugged in computers, laptops. You can set time limits on even different apps like YouTube. You can set time limits I know we use a lot of stuff in ours with Apple and our Apple devices. You can set time limits. You can see how much screen time you've been on the screen, but you can also check how much screen time your kids been on the screen and set those limits. We've used that a lot in our house. We actually also wrote a contract. This was advice I got from another parent. I wrote a contract for my son when he did go to middle school and he did get a smartphone. He has a very specific contract that has in it the expectations that I have. That means that I will respect his privacy, but I do have a right to get on the phone because one, I own the phone, and two, I own the phone plan. And three, I want to learn first whether or not he's able to do it. You don't hand your kids the car keys and say, all right, cool, you can drive now. This isn't really that different, right? You have to monitor it for a little while first, make sure that they're responsible, make sure that they know what they're doing, they put in their hours, and over time they build your trust. And this is kind of what we're learning in this world is working the best. So and I am a big fan of this. I did this a lot in the coaching world. You are really strict at first, and then you can ease up. You ease up when they learn what you expect out of them, and they start to show you that they can do this without you having to be on their back. So, and you have to do this and you have to set this up front so it doesn't feel sneaky or underhanded. You say like, hey, like you need to have passwords that I have access to. So, and this came into play for me the other day. My son missed the bus and he's not driving yet. And at that moment, he didn't have a cell phone. So when I got home and he wasn't there and I didn't know where he was, somehow he did get to school. Another story for another time. But when I didn't know, I saw the device and I quickly got on his device and looked to see did he text a friend? Did he text, a family member to come get him? Because I was trying to figure out where he was, right? So things like that. I know a lot of people use location devices. That's a good one too. Kids have to know that they are, that is part of the deal. When they know that, they can accept it, and that just helps them keep in line a little bit better instead of it just being a free for all. We've talked about this in so many other ways, so many other aspects of um, within mental health and parenting, that if you set really clear boundaries and you set expectations of, if you break this boundary, this is the consequence, then kids know what to expect. They will accept the consequences better. And it doesn't become, what I see happen a lot is parents will get upset with their kids and they'll just maybe be like, okay, I'm taking your phone away for that. Right? It's the easiest thing to go to. And that might feel really unfair to kids because it wasn't part of the expectation. Um, so anyway, contracts can be great for setting those expectations, really making clear boundaries, tech-free zones, meal times, bedrooms. In my house, we have a tech charging station. It is in the kitchen, but it's not near where we sit to eat. Kids get home, they have to plug in their phone, which is in their contract, by the way. Before we go to bed, they have to plug in their phone down there. Now, if I could get my husband to plug in his phone down there, I would truly be winning at life. I can admit that I have not gotten my husband to do that, but we all plug our phones in, myself and my kids plug our phones in down there before bed. We go up to bed, and then I know they're not going to sit on a screen like so many adults do when I'm dealing with sleep hygiene with them, sitting on their phone for hours that just get whittled away. They don't even realize it because they're just sitting on their phone. Um, so those are some things you can do right off the bat. You can also set regular breaks. Something that I did instill with my kids, and I learned this from other parents too. Again, like I constantly trying to learn from other people, is setting breaks. So you can set time limits, but you can also have kids set up timers, and you have a timer go off every 20 minutes. They have to, lock their phone, go outside. It helps them to learn time management when they're older. Maybe they're in college or they're at a job, they have to get a project done. It helps them learn how to get off that app, where they're playing Candy Crush or whatever, whatever the silly the game is that as an adult that we're playing just to pass the time. They get off it and they get back to work and they learn how to do better time management. So this is something that's helping them learn how to do this better. Some more stuff, some resources for parents. Like I said before, there are tons of apps out there that have, if you go into their settings, have ways to monitor and limit screen time. And here's some rules that are set up. Depending on the age of your kid, these apply. Sometimes you have to tell your teens, yeah, no pictures that are nude. There's a new scary movie coming out soon. It's all about AI and how I don't know. I don't even know the details, but I saw the trailer. It all started around inappropriate photos. Sometimes you have to tell kids like, hey, this is inappropriate. And if I see this, the phone goes away and you don't get it back until I know you can be trusted, right? You have to set those screen-free zones, like we were talking about before, dinner time, bedrooms, bathrooms. No one needs to hold a screen while they're in the bathroom. Keeping things private, want to talk to kids about not sharing their passwords with friends, not sharing addresses, limiting what they're putting about where they are on their social media, right? This is something I had to teach a lot of adults about. When you're on vacation, don't post you're on vacation. Post the photos when you get home, because there are people trolling social media that will find out you're away from your home. And that's a great time to go to your home and break in, right? You don't want your kids learning those types of things. So things like that. Tech-free times, we have screen-free Sundays. I know, a whole day. It's crazy. But what do? I fill those days with things like we go for a hike or we do something really fun. My daughter loves Climb Zone. We go to places that do, paintball, and we go on hikes, and we try and do really fun things so the kids don't miss the screen. They're not sitting in something super boring, listening to someone talk about policy. I don't know, policy is boring to me. So for those that are policy gurus and love it, sorry. But that would be something I try and make things fun. Organizations like Common Sense Media, and there are others, put a lot of stuff out there that can kind of help you navigate common sense things, right? To help your kids get through it. Okay. Also, it's not all bad. Okay. I'm the first to tell you it's not all bad. So if you can get your kids, if they want screen time, if you can get them using, I do this with TV, tell kids that YouTube's the bane of my existence. But if they're on YouTube and they're learning how to do something new, my daughter likes art. If she's doing something where she's learning how to draw or paint, I let her stay on YouTube as long as that's what she's doing. If she's sitting there watching two teenagers fight or talk about like the best hotel room or something ridiculous that it's kind of nonsensical, I taper that, right? If my son, he's really into science and math, he's watching a YouTube video from Mark Rober, or he's learning about some survivalist thing or something cool like that, I'm all about it. If he's learning a new skill for a sport, I'm fine with it. And they know that. And so they know they do get some fun screen time like that. But if they're doing it too long, I will quickly put a stop to that. And I'll also allow them to use educational apps. Khan Academy, Duolingo is great for learning other languages. I've used it several times with the kids and they get really into it. And that's something you can do as a family. You can also promote apps for mindfulness, the Calm app, Headspace, of course, for older kids. There are lots of apps out there and I've done a whole session on just that. Great videos out there related to health and wellness. So if they're on the Fitbit app and they're checking their steps compared to somebody else, that's a healthy way of using it. And we can use it. Getting on FaceTime to call the grandparents or the aunts and uncles, or maybe a friend that's moved to another town, that's all good. You're finding a way to connect with people. So just really, it's all about balance, right? And there are ways to get on a screen that can be important and helpful. So modeling the behavior. We've all been there. We've all had the parent or the adult that does something and then they don't even do it themselves. My first thought is the coach that's trying to tell us we're going to be the best in shape team and they have, a pot belly. I'm thinking, okay, when's the last time you went for a jog? So that can be troublesome. So as parents, we got to model that behavior, right? That's why I plug my phone in downstairs too. And if I tell the kids not to be on a screen, if I'm on it when they're not allowed to be on it, I will tell them like, hey, I'm texting your father right now to make sure he picks up dinner, or, I'm writing to the parents for the play date that you want. Or so they kind of know, not that I always need to justify it, but that is helpful for kids. So, and that can help kids know that you're in it too. I'll be the first to say, I don't want to be addicted to a screen. So I very purposely put mine down. I try and stay away from it. And when I don't need to be on it, and I do when I pick it up randomly, and I've done this at night before, when I start scrolling, I'm going, what am I looking for? A lot of times I'm looking for validation. So then I think about it and I go, you know what? If I'm seeking validation, why don't I send a, hey, I'm thinking of you text, not because I want it in return, but just because that might feel good to someone. Or I might call a family member if it's not too late and just chat with them. So, setting your own limits and modeling the behavior will be really important in your kids respecting the limits that you set. Talking to your kids is going to be really important about the use of smartphones. If they do break a rule, talk to them about it. Ask them, what happened there? What was it? What was it? Maybe they were in a fight with their friend and they were really wanting to resolve it. So that's a good intention, right? And so you can talk them through that and you can kind of talk them through. And if you write a contract, you can help them write the contract. That can get a lot of buy-in. So really spend time talking to your kids about it and you be actively engaged in helping them find other things that are fun to do. For parents right now, this is our big struggle. We are fighting against screens that are so entertaining that it takes the place of being around other people, at least at first, until you all end up in my office because you're depressed and anxious. And I don't want that, right? So kids don't have that forethought. They can't think about, well, when I'm 20, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Court because I'm severely depressed because I spent too much time on the screen. They're not thinking about that. So sometimes you have to kind of think about that for them and help them learn good habits by modeling them, talking through it, and buying into it also. So do we have all the answers yet? No. There are still a lot of long-term impacts we don't really know. What we do know so far is that excessive screen time alters mood and cognition. It impacts learning. It impacts the structure and the chemical makeup of our brains. It impacts the way we socially interact and the way we can interpret social interactions, and not in a good way. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done, and we're getting there. If you have tips and tricks that you've used with your kids related to having healthy and balanced screen use, please post it in our Facebook page. We'd love to see it. We'd love to see what you're able to do because that will be helpful for all of us. And hey, it takes a village. So I hope this session was helpful to you. Please, again, if you have topics that you're interested in, questions that you have, post it on our Facebook page, and we'll do our best to deal with that. I will tell you a shout out to some of our local school partners. This was a topic that came up in a discussion with them. And that's why I did this session today, was because it was coming up with local teachers, administrators, and parents that were struggling with the screen time thing. And since I was too, and I had recently done a lot of research because of my own kids, I thought this was a great time to try and put it all together. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Please share this, and I will see you next time. All right, have a great one, everybody, and get outside and touch some grass. All right, see ya.